Good evening. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here at the opening of this anniversary Congress, particularly interviewing Professor Stiglitz. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Nice to be here.
I would like to start by addressing the role of information in sustaining democracy and efficient markets. You have wrote about this, you have spoke about this. Most recently, you signed together with other 10 economists a manifesto organized by the Forum for Information and Democracy at the International Fund for Public Media Interest, talking about the economic imperative of investing in public interest media. Could you share a little bit more with us about that, please?
Yeah, well, my earlier work in economics, for which I got the Nobel Prize, was about how good information is essential for the functioning of the economy. It's almost obvious that is the case. But it's also important for the functioning of our society, for our polity, and including for our democracy. And the particular initiative that you referred to is an initiative of this group of countries put together by the President of Spain, the head of Chile, President Lula in Brazil, a whole group of that, very timely. It's called Democracy Forever, about in this moment, these presidents realize that democracy is under attack and are trying to think about how can they preserve democracy in their country and in the world. And an essential pillar of their agenda to preserve democracy is maintaining a flow of public information, good information, a free press. We've heard several preliminary, and they've articulated why it is already so imperative. As an economist, I put it in a way that may sound like jargon, but let me articulate it the way we talk about good information as a public good. And by public good, we mean something that everybody benefits, as opposed to a private good. If you consume food, you can't. If I consume food, you can't consume it. That's a private good. But information is something that everybody benefits from. And if you know it, you don't take it away from what I know. We can all share it without diminishing it. And a fundamental insight of modern economics is that these public goods play an absolutely essential role for the functioning of our economy, our society, our polity, our democracy, and that the private sector on its own won't supply enough of them because each individual doesn't benefit enough. We all know there should be good information, but we free ride on the hope that somebody else will pay for it. And that's why, in one way or another, it has to be publicly provided. So if it's a public good, there has to be, in my view, an important role in public provision. And the failure to have that is one of the reasons that we're having the crisis in news that we have today.
Thank you. As still addressing the issue of information as a public good, so you're talking about, you started talking about like information, public information or public journalism. Can we also believe that private media organizations should have support from government and society?
Yeah, the basic idea is you want to separate out the production from the finance. And you should have a lot of private production, private news, but it needs public support, because without public support, there won't be enough of it. And all of you probably know some of the public benefits. For instance, when the news uncovers corruption and stops some individual from stealing from the public or from a corporation, we all benefit. And so we need, that's just one example of the investigative reporting that was done in the Panama Papers, exposed the way that tax revenues were being undermined by tax avoidance, exposed a whole variety of kinds of nefarious activities. And once they're exposed, there's pressure to reduce them, to tame them at least. So, these are necessary for the functioning of our society. One way I think about it, and I put it, is it's part of our control mechanism. It's like a thermostat. Is the room too hot or too cold? Are we doing the right thing? You need to have somebody monitoring how the system is performing. And the press is absolutely essential in performing that monitoring role.
Thank you. I see your button for hands off our students. For those who can't read, I would like to ask you, how would you describe the state of media freedom in the U.S. and of academic freedom in the U.S., and are the two related in any way?
Yes, they are very much related. The state is, to put it mildly, not good. I'm wearing this little badge to reflect the fact that ICE has come on to our campus, picked up some of our students, deported them. But the mechanisms that are at play here are subtle, and we don't look like a full authoritarian regime yet, but we're beginning to see the mechanisms by which authoritarian regimes work. So, as one example, students who are not U.S. citizens and faculty who are not U.S. citizens are afraid to speak out. Because if they speak out, if they write an article in a student newspaper, the next day they may lose their visa. And, the way this administration works is absolutely terrible. They will take away your visa and not tell you, and then the next day arrest you for being in the country without a visa. And so if you have been told, you would leave, but they don't tell you. And therefore, they can ship you down to Louisiana or some other place and deprive you of all of your rights. So even if it's illegal, they know that your ability to challenge that will take lots of money, lots of time, and meanwhile, what they have done has instilled fear. And so that's one of their main tools, instilling fear so that people don't speak up, don't write. But a second mechanism that they use that we're beginning to see in so many ways is the abuse of economic power. They took off two of the most popular comedy news shows, Kimmel and Colbert. It wasn't economics that led the news stations to take them off. The news stations wanted to acquire other stations or wanted some other regulatory relief from the government. And the government said, we have this instrument of control, and unless you bend to our will, you won't be able to do what you want to do. So they use their regulatory power as a mechanism for censorship. So it is a form of censorship. With shows being taken off because they don't want that kind of criticism of the administration. And then we see other tools of control. They try to stop news reporters from being able to be part of the White House press. If they didn't call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. You know, and it sounds a little bit amusing. What difference does it make? But it's the beginning of an encroachment of what language you use. You can't talk about climate change. Schools, you know, you can't have departments of gender studies. It's a kind of censorship that becomes pervasive in our society. Control of language becomes very, very important. And then more recently, you've seen the way they've told the people who covered the Defense Department that if you want to have offices in the Defense Department, you have to sign this statement that says you won't listen to any other news except what we provide. You won't have, quote, leaks, which meant you only get information that we tell you. We want to control the information that you get. So it's clear that the Trump administration is engaged in the kind of censorship, the kind of controlling the media that you see in Hungary and that you see in other authoritarian countries. Now, you asked the question, what is the link between this and academic freedom? I think of press freedom and academic freedom. I mean, obviously that's my business in a way, and I care a lot about that. I said that the press is part of the control mechanism of our society to make sure that we're doing the right thing, uncovering mistakes. Academia is part of that control mechanism too. And I think in many ways they work together. Academia has the privilege of being able to think about things long term. Most of the media has to think about short term. There are some stories, investigative reporting that does take a long time, but academia typically thinks about how does the whole system work, and people devote their lives to questions of, say, who bears the cost of a tariff? Is it borne more by poor people? If we impose a tariff on China, does China pay, or do America pay? Do Americans pay? Well, again, authoritarian regimes like that of Trump don't want to hear a story that's different from the story they're telling. And we happen to have the evidence on our side. And that is the common grain. They don't want any discussion of truth. In fact, they deny even the existence of truth. So in some sense, these authoritarian figures are trying, their agenda is to say truth doesn't exist. And both, I think, the media and academia are concerned about discovering the truth and disseminating that. And that's the last stage, dissemination, I think is absolutely essential for the functioning of our democracy.
Thank you. One image that became very famous worldwide was in the inauguration, a picture of all the CEOs and founders of American big tech companies at the Trump inauguration. We have been discussing more and more the relationship of big tech and journalism and the consequences of that. There is established narrative that affirms that any type of regulation equals censorship and inhibits economic growth. I think this is an element that today compares a lot, try to make comparison between Europe and the US, for instance. How do you interpret that?
Well, I think he's totally wrong. Let me say, there are lots of jokes about this. Like one famous joke is that U.S. innovates, China imitates, and Europe regulates. And the idea that the regulation in Europe is what is inhibiting innovation. First, let me say, actually, there is a lot of innovation going on in Europe. And what is striking about the United States is that while we claim to be an innovative society, if you look at what is happening to standard metrics of income per capita, life expectancy, it's not doing very well. In many ways, Europe is doing better in those metrics of what makes for a good living standard than the United States. So is the economy, are individuals supposed to serve the economy, or the economy serve individuals? Well, we've created a world in the United States where we say the individuals are supposed to serve the economy rather than the other way around. Now, my own view is that good regulatory systems actually encourage the right kind of innovation. Now, you think about what was the major focus of innovation in the United States over the long period of time from, say, the first 20 years of this century. It was building a more efficient advertising engine. That's what everybody was innovating about. How can we target people? How can we give them mis and disinformation so that click more and therefore we'll get more advertising? Now, if you're thinking about what society needs, I think about climate change, I think about health, I think about lots of things, but I don't think the most important area we needed more innovation was a better advertising engine. What kind of society devotes their most talented people to building a better and better advertising engine without any scruples about what the impact are on our citizens? And so you get Facebook succeeding through a model of engagement through enragement, polarizing our society, undermining our democracy. So I think that innovation actually has a negative effect on our society. So to me, good regulation has the potential of channeling the creative energies of our society into ways that make our society better off, not worse off. And that's what's been, it's the opposite of what's been happening. One of the things I think you brought out, criticism. One of the reasons, one of the arguments that Silicon Valley, the oligarchs that you referred to, make is that don't regulate because that will stifle innovation, even if it's bad innovation. But what they've been doing is, with that, in many ways, breaking our society, breaking our democracy. And they say, you better not regulate. But their view is because that might do some damage. Well, they're doing an enormous amount of damage. If we have the right regulation, we'll prevent that damage. And I have a lot of confidence that we can get that right regulation. There was a little bit discussion earlier in the couple of speeches we just heard about from the minister in particular, talking about the importance of content moderation, hate speech. You think about what happened in the Rohingyas that was stimulated by Facebook. Enormous damage to a society that was done. We could have stopped that. And the important point here is we can moderate this extreme societal dysfunctional behavior without really worrying about censorship, which is the argument that they make. It's not censorship to stop something that is undermining our society. We stop childhood pornography. We can target the really destructive aspects of say, social media.
You've written extensively about inequality in multiple senses. Do you think that disinformation and media capture can exacerbate economic and political inequality? And is this it has more consequences to emerging economies, or it's harming every type of economy and society?
It does. And one, I think it does play into societal inequalities. One way it does that is illustrated by the example that you just gave. Our understanding of the world is mediated to a large extent through what we see in the media. And they've been very successful in creating a narrative that regulation is bad and that they are innovative. That's the image they have. But that image of their innovation, being innovative, doesn't talk about innovative for whom. Does it really improve the well-being of society? And part of the narrative that they have is it's a bad thing to tax the wealthy. Now, do you really believe that somebody like Jeff Bezos would stop working if you taxed him so that he only had 150 billion rather than 300 billion? I think his desire to exploit others will be just as strong if you imposed a higher tax on him. And that's true of all the oligarchs. The fact is, do you really believe that you needed to pay Musk $50 billion to spend some more time at Tesla to manage the company rather than driving it into the hole that he's been driving it into? It's just inconceivable. But they tell that narrative, and that narrative has really influenced how our society functions. So it's really been hard to get progressive taxation, a wealth tax. France has been going through this faces a budgetary deficit. The question is, how do you fill it? Obvious answer, where's the money? And so there's been a proposal of a minimum tax of 2% on wealth. And if you think about it, these are supposed to be very successful entrepreneurs. They should be getting at least 6% return on their capital, probably 10%. They're getting a 6% return. A minimum tax of 2% is only a 33% tax on the income. The story that is going around France is that would undermine entrepreneurship in France. I find it remarkable that so many very wealthy people in France are holding up their hands and saying, we are tax avoiders. Because if they were paying 33%, there's no new tax. What they're saying is, I'm getting away with less than, a 33% tax. I'm getting a 20% or 10% tax. And yet the narrative doesn't really capture the fact that these guys are major tax avoiders. So if they control the media, then they control the stories that people tell and that people hear. So I think that's really the danger of having the kind of media architecture that we have in the United States and many other countries, where it is the oligarchs, the very wealthy, control the media, and then they use that control to make sure that their version of reality is the only one that people see. Now, in some cases like Hungary, they've gone even further and they say, no criticism of the government, we only want, but look at what's happening in the United States, where they try to take down the Kimmel Show and Colbert. You can see us moving in that direction.
In Brazil, the country where I come from, we're currently discussing a big tax reform, and one of the points is taxing billionaires. And the answer to that is that the argument against that is that they will leave the country. The money will go out of the country. What would you say to that argument?
Well, that's a question that people have looked at, and the evidence is that will not be the case. You look at in the United States, the billionaires, millionaires can go to Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States, and rather than paying 60% income tax that they pay in New York City with the federal state tax, they could have a 4% tax rate in Puerto Rico. So they have a way, they have some place they could go, still keep their U.S. citizenship without any problem. They don't, some of them do, but very, very few. But the other answer is, and it's part of the proposal in France, and we have it in the United States, is an exit tax. Okay, you can give up your U.S. citizenship, but if you do that, when you take your capital out, you have to pay a tax as you bring it out. And with an appropriately designed exit tax, there won't be capital leaving the country.
Thank you. In its past Congress, the IPI has honored journalists in Ukraine, in Gaza, and the organization has been supporting journalists and war zones. Do you believe that international community and financial institutions are doing enough to protect journalists reporting from places like Gaza and Ukraine? And do you believe are there global mechanisms, financial, legal, or institutional, that could ensure that journalists can report freely and safely in times of war?
Well, I mean, clearly they're not doing enough. There shouldn't be so many journalists. It shouldn't be that dangerous. It's such an important function to bring information. And what's gone on in Gaza, the number of journalists that have been evidently targeted and killed is horrendous. So I think that this issue that you raised, that first, that journalists covering war zones or covering the environmental wars of Brazil, the journalists covering the Amazon and what's happening there have had a really hard time. I don't know, you probably know the number of deaths that have occurred there. First, we ought to emphasize how important that public good of covering that. We've always had coverage in war, and it's really important to have that kind of coverage. But it's clear, I say, first, it's important to have that coverage, and secondly, it's become very dangerous. And therefore, it's evident that we're not protecting that. And we ought to, we'll never be perfectly successful. There just is an inherent risk at covering this, but there shouldn't be a risk of covering the environment, the Amazon. That shouldn't be a dangerous place to cover. And so when a reporter gets killed covering the Amazon, it should be a major effort to find out why, and the government should really make it a super crime.
Thank you. Do you think that multilateralism is still relevant in the current geopolitics? And how would you describe the current relationship between the global north and the global south?
Well, we share one planet. So in that sense, multilateralism has to be relevant. We're all exposed to climate change. We're all exposed to a pandemic. The pathogens don't know about borders. They go across borders. So we can't get away from multilateralism, working together to solve common problems. We also, as an economist, I think a rules-based trading economic system with some stability has the potential of having benefits for all. Now, we're going through, everybody knows, a very difficult period, because the United States, that used to be the champion of a rules-based system, even if it were rules that benefited the United States more than it benefited developing countries, it at least put forward a facade of believing in a rules-based system, has now just walked away. An agreement with the United States is not worth the paper it's written on. And the United States, Trump believes in a zero-sum world where if anybody else is doing well, it must be because we're doing badly. That's not the way economists see the world, that there are mutual gains from trade, from exchange, from capital flows, if they are correctly structured. So he's trying to get more for the United States at the expense of others. For me, the sad thing is that so many countries have capitulated. Europe capitulated. If this were just a trade agreement, there would be no way of understanding that capitulation, because Europe as an economy is as large as the United States. Why is it more important for Europe to have access to the United States than the United States having access to Europe? Any theory of economic theory, we go bargaining theory, would say that 15% is unconscionable, would not emerge. But what is at stake is not just trade. There's a war in Ukraine going out, and U.S. Support, if it's only not financial support, but just access to certain armaments, is essential. And so one has to see what emerged as part of that broader geopolitics rather than just geoeconomics. But to me, the lesson of that is very strong. There's a really urgent need for Europe not to be dependent on U.S. for defense. U.S. is not a reliable partner. It's hard for Europe to get its mind wrapped around that idea. It's been a partner for 75 years, 80 years, and now it has to wake up to the fact that it is not a reliable partner. And that is a very big change. And not only is it not a reliable defense partner, it's not a reliable technology partner. Europe has all of its data on American cloud. the United States could cut it off at any moment. And our tech oligarchs, you saw that, you mentioned that picture. If Trump says to these tech oligarchs, cut off Europe, they'll probably obey. So they give you a sense of the precariousness that Europe has today. It could get that technology and defense independence to a very large extent in 6 months, a year and a half, if it made a commitment to do it and realize the urgency. But in Brussels, there doesn't seem to be an awareness of the urgency of the situation. So that's the particular, you asked the question about the developing countries, the emerging markets. One of the interesting things to me is President Lula was one of the few people who stood up, and President Xi also stood up. And in both cases, the country went on. It wasn't the end of the Brazilian economy. It wasn't the end of the Chinese economy. In fact, in the case of China, developed that expression, about Trump, taco. Trump always chickens out. He lowered the tariff. And China realized that what is at stake is not just trade, but a broader sense of economic interdependence. And, the United States has been has imposed all kinds of export restrictions on technology products to China. And China said, well, if you're going to do that to us, we are going to impose restrictions on exports, in this case of rare earths and magnets to the United States. And the United States says, well, that's unfair. The level of hypocrisy that you hear, it's all right for us to put export restraints, but not for China. You can understand why most people around the world don't understand where the principles that the United States is invoking are coming from. And the answer is there are no principles other than what's good for the United States is good for the world, and accept it. But the reality is that the United States is now the second largest economy next to China in the world in the way we typically measure it in purchasing power parity. But it has become the most aggressive country in economic relations. And if Europe stood together, if Europe partnered more in economic with China, recognizing China as authoritarian, U.S. doesn't have the global clout that it assumes it has. Trump has framed it as if the cards are all in the U.S. hands. But as an economist, I look at it and I say, that's just not true unless the other countries on their own capitulate.
So I think that we're seeing democracy in crisis in many countries, but I think that we're also seeing some resilient democracies. It's the case of Brazil, it's the case of Chile. So are you optimistic or pessimistic when it comes to democracy?
Well, I'm basically optimistic. I mean, seeing what's going on in this democracy forever grouping of countries really committed. They had a meeting at the UN in September. I went to that meeting. There were 20 countries saying, we're going to fight for democracy, having a clear view of what it's going to take, including press, including digital technology independence, what is at stake and what are the mechanisms and an agenda. So that makes me optimistic. The fact is that in many of these countries, the governments are in power in a very precarious way, partly because of mis and disinformation coming from oligarchs, from media that is distorted, controlled by the oligarchs, from social media controlled by the oligarchs. So it's there's an optimism, but I have to say it's a cautious optimism.
But it's an optimism, I'll say. Some people say that journalists might be dying. Journalism and journalists are constantly attacked in many countries around the world. Yet we are here celebrating 75 years of an organization that defends the freedom of the press in a room full of, I guess, hopeful people. So I would like to ask you, what gives you hope?
Well, I do. What gives me hope, I've been to a couple of other journalist conferences. I was one in Georgia. There's a country under threat, whereas government has gone over to the other side of authoritarianism. But you see, even though the government is going in the wrong direction and clear authoritarian moves, brave journalists standing up and even in Georgia, talking about the importance of an independent, free press. It gives me a lot of hope that in the United States you have so many academics standing up. Trump made, quote, an offer to 11 universities to capitulate and come under his thumb. And so far, 9 have rejected and 1 is still debating. Only 1 has accepted. So the fact that after deliberating, saying, we could get a good deal if we capitulate, 9 out of 11 have said no. We are going to fight, even if it costs us a lot of money. But in the end, I think what inspires me is the individuals who put their lives, their careers at stake in order that all of us get the information that we need for our society to function.
Professor Stiglitz, thank you very much for having us, for being here with us.